40,000 voices filled the arena, but one man sat trembling with a message that could shatter everything. Benny Hinn adjusted his white suit, unaware Keanu Reeves had been sent with words straight from Jesus himself. When Keanu finally spoke, Benny collapsed on live television because what he revealed would change faith forever. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The air inside Lakeview Arena in Dallas was electric, thick with anticipation. 40,000 men and women had gathered, their voices rising in praise that echoed like rolling thunder through the steel rafters. The atmosphere carried a rhythm of celebration, but behind the curtain, where the lights hadn't yet reached, another kind of silence hung heavy. It was the kind of silence that precedes revelation, the kind that makes a man's heartbeat sound louder than the music just beyond the wall. Benny Hinn stood calmly in front of a tall mirror, straightening the collar of his pristine white suit. For decades, this ritual had been his comfort. He had walked onto stages across continents, always dressed in the same tailored uniform, a symbol of his ministry and the identity he had built over half a century. His reflection looked steady, composed, every detail in place as if nothing unusual awaited him. For Benny, this was just another night, another crusade, another sea of faces ready to witness what they believed would be the miraculous. He hummed softly to himself, oblivious to the storm that was about to tear through the calm he thought he knew. Across the narrow corridor, Keanu Reeves sat hunched forward on a folding chair, his elbows pressed against his knees, his hands clasped together so tightly the veins in his knuckles bulged. He was not dressed for spectacle only in a plain dark jacket, worn jeans, and boots that had seen better days. To the thousands chanting outside, his presence would have seemed like an oddity, a Hollywood actor walking into a sanctuary of faith. But Keanu wasn't here as an actor. He wasn't here as a celebrity. He wasn't here for attention at all. He was here as a reluctant messenger, carrying a burden he would have given anything to pass on to someone else. 3 nights had stolen his sleep. He had tossed on hotel pillows, stared into ceilings, and buried his face in weary hands, pleading with God to release him from what had been spoken. The visions hadn't stopped. The voice had been clear. No matter how he reasoned with it, no matter how he tried to silence it with logic or exhaustion, the command pressed harder against his soul. It was simple and undeniable. Deliver the message to Benny Hinn. Do not delay, do not withhold, do not fear. The contrast between the two men could not have been sharper. Benny's face glowed with the calm assurance of someone stepping into a familiar rhythm, the rhythm of lights, cameras, applause, and sermons rehearsed by years of practice. Keanu's face told another story. His jaw was tight, his brow furrowed. His breathing was deliberate, shallow, as though he were forcing himself to remain steady while carrying a weight too heavy for one man to bear. Every second in that chair felt like eternity, and every beat of his heart reminded him he was seconds away from obedience or collapse. What unsettled Keanu most wasn't the stage, or the cameras, or even the thought of speaking words that weren't his own. It was the fact that he didn't want this. His life had been one of retreat, not proclamation. He was known for his quiet presence, not bold declarations. Yet here he was, in the underbelly of a roaring arena, tasked with words that could dismantle the identity of one of the most recognized evangelists in the world. It was almost unbearable, but it wasn't his choice, and he knew, more than he had ever known anything, that ignoring the voice of Jesus was not an option. The arena staff moved briskly up and down the hall, checking cables, speaking into radios, adjusting earpieces, all part of the machinery that made a night like this look effortless. But Keanu barely noticed them. His eyes were closed now, not in rest but in discipline, as if shutting out the movement around him might steady the storm raging inside. He whispered short prayers under his breath, the kind a man prays when words fail. They weren't polished, they weren't rehearsed, they weren't even complete sentences. They were fragments of desperation. Lord, help me. Give me strength. Not my words, yours. Each phrase trembled from his lips like fragile glass. On the other side of the corridor, Benny's team hovered with ease, born of routine. Assistants checked his microphone, dabbed his forehead with powder to soften the shine of stage lights, straightened the fall of his jacket across his shoulders. They spoke in low, cheerful tones, confident that tonight would be no different from the countless others before it. The crowd was already alive, primed for miracles, expecting the familiar rhythm of worship followed by the surge of healing that had marked Benny's ministry for decades. To his staff, there was no reason to think this night would end any differently. Benny himself smiled faintly, thanking them with a gentle nod, moving with the composure of a man who had mastered these moments long ago. But beneath the weight of routine, something subtle stirred. Benny paused for a fraction of a second as he fastened the final button of his suit. A strange chill brushed the back of his neck, the kind that makes even the most seasoned soul shift uncomfortably. He turned his head slightly, eyes narrowing toward the corridor, as if some invisible force was nudging him to look beyond the mirror, beyond the lights, beyond himself. For a moment, he thought he caught the faint sound of a voice not from the arena, not from his staff, but from somewhere deeper. He shook his head, dismissing it, telling himself it was just nerves, nothing more. After 50 years of ministry, he believed he had felt everything. Tonight would be no different. At least, that's what he told himself. Keanu's hands unclasped briefly, fingers trembling as though they no longer obeyed him. He leaned back against the chair, pressing his palms against his thighs to ground himself. His mind raced with memories of the vision from 3 nights ago, the moment when his hotel room had shifted from ordinary to eternal. The voice had been undeniable. It wasn't thunder. It wasn't whisper. It was something greater than both, reverberating from a place no human language could fully capture. He had heard it clearly. Tell Benny Hinn that his season of comfort is ending. His calling is changing. He must step into shadows where only I will see. Those words had etched themselves into his soul, carved into memory with fire that couldn't be erased. The seconds ticked by like hammers. Somewhere outside, a wave of applause roared as Joel Osteen's voice rose over the sound system, warming the crowd, preparing them for the entrance of their honored guests. Keanu opened his eyes, staring at the floor, unable to stop the tremor in his breath. In another minute, the curtain would part, the lights would blind, and 40,000 souls would be watching. But the one that mattered most had already been watching all along. Keanu rose slowly from the folding chair, every motion deliberate, as though gravity itself had thickened around him. He pulled the worn leather journal from the inside of his jacket, its edges frayed, its pages marked with scribbles and underlined words written in haste during nights of sleepless prayer. He held it loosely in his hand, the way one might hold something sacred and fragile at the same time. It wasn't proof for anyone else. It was proof for him. A reminder that what he carried wasn't a product of imagination or emotion. It was the record of moments when heaven had broken through. Across the corridor, Benny placed his Bible under his arm and smiled faintly at the stage manager who announced, 2 minutes. He carried himself with ease, projecting calm authority. Yet a subtle unease lingered beneath his polished composure, a whisper he could not name. He glanced again toward the far side of the hallway where Keanu now stood. Their eyes met for the first time that evening. Benny saw something that startled him, something raw and unguarded eyes, burdened by weight heavier than celebrity, heavier than fame, heavier than any role he had ever played. In that fleeting glance, Benny's confidence wavered. He knew the look of a man carrying a secret too heavy to keep. The muffled roar of the crowd swelled as the opening song reached its crescendo, shaking the floor beneath their feet. Stagehands moved quickly, checking last-minute details, ushering Benny toward the curtain. Keanu followed, steps slower, shoulders tense, the journal clutched tighter now. His lips moved silently, another prayer rising from a heart that felt painfully unworthy of the task before him. He had never wanted microphones, never wanted pulpits, never wanted the pressure of being anyone's voice but his own. Yet here he was, about to speak words that were not his, words he had no right to claim, words that burned inside him like fire shut up in his bones. Benny paused just before the curtain, inhaling deeply, the familiar rush of anticipation flowing through him. He reminded himself of the countless nights just like this one, nights where thousands were healed, nights where cameras broadcasted miracles to the world. He believed he was ready. He had been ready his whole life, but standing just behind him, Keanu knew better. He knew that readiness had nothing to do with what was coming. This wasn't about preparation, or performance, or reputation. This was about obedience. The seconds bled away. The stage manager lifted his hand, 3 fingers raised, then 2, then 1. The curtain was about to open. Benny Hinn adjusted his jacket and lifted his chin, preparing to step into the light. Keanu Reeves lowered his head, whispering the same words he had repeated all day. "Not my will. Yours." The crowd roared, unaware that the man they had come to see and the man they had not expected to hear were both standing on the edge of a moment that would change their lives forever. The voice of the stage manager cut sharply through the dimly lit corridor. "You're on in 60 seconds. His tone was brisk, professional, the kind of announcement that usually carried no weight beyond logistics. But tonight it landed differently. It sounded like a countdown, not to another service, not to another appearance, but to something far heavier. The words seemed to press against Keanu's chest, as though the second hand of the clock itself carried judgment. He rose slowly from where he had been standing, his journal still pressed against his side. His legs felt like stone. Every step forward was deliberate, almost reluctant. His hands trembled faintly, betraying the battle raging within. He curled his fingers into fists for a moment, trying to steady them, then let them open again, palms damp with sweat. He had walked onto countless sets, had performed in front of millions, but never had his body betrayed him like this. This wasn't fear of failure. It wasn't fear of being misunderstood. It was the unbearable gravity of obedience. Benny Hinn caught the subtle shift. He had lived long enough, led enough crusades, counseled enough souls to know when a man was underweight he could not carry alone. At first, he told himself it was nerves. Celebrities had stood beside him before, and many of them were uneasy when the cameras rolled. But the look in Keanu's eyes wasn't stage fright. It was something deeper. It was the gaze of a man whose heart was both heavy and unwilling, the eyes of someone who carried a burden no one else could touch. "Mr. Reeves," Benny said softly, reaching out a hand as they drew nearer to the curtain. His voice carried warmth, the practiced tone of reassurance that had calmed thousands before. "You look like a man, carrying the weight of something far heavier than you are used to. Are you all right?" Keanu hesitated, staring at Benny's hand before clasping it briefly. His grip was firm, but his fingers trembled against Benny's palm. He leaned closer, lowering his voice to a near whisper. "Pastor Hinn, what I'm about to say out there will be the hardest thing I've ever had to speak aloud." The words lodged like an arrow in Benny's chest. He blinked, momentarily disarmed. In all his years, he had stood beside kings, prime ministers, fellow ministers, and global figures of every kind. He had never heard such a statement uttered in a backstage corridor moments before stepping into the lights. There was no bravado in Keanu's voice, no attempt at drama, no exaggeration. It was raw, restrained, and laced with a trembling sincerity that made Benny's spirit shift uneasily. For the first time that evening, Benny's heart skipped. He inhaled deeply, his composure intact, but his thoughts suddenly unsteady. The white suit that had always felt like armor suddenly seemed thinner, less reliable. A man who had seen thousands cry out for miracles now found himself caught by the unease of one quiet, reluctant messenger. Benny studied Keanu's face more carefully, unsettled by the depth of unease he saw. The light spilling through the edges of the curtain flickered across Keanu's features, revealing a man caught in the grip of something he could not simply shrug off. His jaw was set tight, but his eyes betrayed him. They were glassy, almost wet, carrying the sorrow of someone who wished he could flee but knew escape was impossible. "What do you mean?" Benny asked, his voice quieter now, stripped of its polished cadence. He leaned closer, as if desperate to anchor himself to whatever explanation might come. Keanu swallowed hard. His throat was dry, every word requiring effort. He spoke just above the noise of the arena. 3 nights ago, I heard him, not in a dream, not in a metaphor. I heard Jesus, by name, and he gave me words for you. His chest rose and fell with sharp breaths, as though confessing the truth only increased the weight pressing down on him. Benny's heart gave an involuntary lurch. In 5 decades of ministry, he had met countless men and women who claimed to hear divine voices. Many spoke with passion, others with theatrics, but rarely with trembling restraint. Yet here was Keanu Reeves, the quiet actor the world knew for his silence more than his speech, shaking as he confessed a message he had not asked for. Something in the evangelist's spirit stirred, a whisper he could not name. The arena's thunder rolled again as the crowd responded to Joel Osteen's opening remarks. Benny could hear the wave of applause, the energy of expectation, the familiar soundtrack of his life's work. It should have calmed him, but instead, it felt distant, almost irrelevant. His attention was fixed on the man beside him, whose words had pulled him into a tension he could not shake. "Jesus spoke to you?" Benny repeated softly, his lips barely moving, as though afraid the staff nearby might overhear. Keanu nodded once, firmly. "By name, about you, about your calling, about what's coming." His voice cracked on the last word, but he steadied himself, eyes narrowing with reluctant determination. "And I begged him to send someone else. I told him he had the wrong man. But the voice, it wouldn't let me go." Benny blinked rapidly, trying to hide the sting of unease now pricking his eyes. He adjusted his sleeve, more to buy himself time than to fix anything. The man he had considered a guest, a novelty perhaps for the audience, was suddenly no longer that. He was something else entirely. The stage manager lifted his headset and called again. 30 seconds. The urgency in his tone clashed with the sacred tension building in the corridor. The normal countdown to performance had become a countdown to confrontation, a ticking clock toward words that promised to pierce deeper than applause or spotlight. Benny's pulse quickened. He straightened his back, forcing composure, but the question pressing against his lips betrayed his growing fear. What kind of message? Keanu didn't answer right away. His gaze dropped to the journal pressed tightly against his chest, the leather worn thin at the edges. His silence felt heavier than words, like the pause of a man deciding if he could carry the burden any longer. When he finally lifted his eyes back to Benny's, they glistened, not from emotion alone, but from the raw struggle of surrender. "Pastor Hinn," he said, voice low but firm, "what I'm carrying isn't mine. It isn't opinion. It isn't advice. These are words I never wanted to hold. But I know with every breath that if I do not release them, I will have disobeyed the one who gave them." His hands shook more visibly now, forcing him to grip the journal tighter to keep it steady. Benny shifted, torn between curiosity and dread. Something in his spirit warned him that the weight of what Keanu carried would not be light. His polished calm cracked for the briefest moment, and a sliver of fear cut through. He had weathered scandals, rumors, and the scrutiny of the world. But this was different. This was not criticism. This was not speculation. This was a man who claimed to have heard the voice of Jesus himself, and his trembling made it harder to dismiss. Another wave of applause roared from the arena, shaking the air, a reminder that the curtain would open in seconds. Yet the sound felt muted, as if it belonged to another world entirely. In this narrow corridor, time slowed, the noise outside shrinking beneath the pressure of what was about to be spoken. Keanu leaned closer, his voice dropping into a whisper so sharp it cut straight through the noise. "When I speak, it will not be about movies or fame or even me. It will be about you, about your future, about the season of ease that is ending." His words carried no theatrics, no flourish. They were plain, but they burned with urgency. Benny's breath caught, the phrase lodged inside him, twisting tighter than he expected. Season of ease. His eyes darted toward the curtain where the lights flickered, then back to Keanu, whose trembling hands betrayed no malice, only obedience. The stage manager's voice rose again, urgent this time. 10 seconds. He motioned for them to take their places. Staff scurried. Cables pulled tight. Cameras fixed into position. Everything was ready for another familiar night. But for the two men standing at the threshold, nothing felt familiar at all. Benny forced a faint smile, though unease pulsed through his veins. He tightened his grip on his Bible, whispering to himself words of reassurance, though they rang hollow. Keanu lowered his head, muttering the same prayer he had carried all evening. "Not my will. Yours." The countdown ended. The curtain began to move. Benny stepped forward with the confidence of decades. Keanu followed, trembling but resolute, carrying a message he knew would shatter everything. The curtain swept open and a blinding wash of light poured across the stage. The roar of 40,000 voices hit with the force of a wave, rising from every corner of Lakeview Arena. It was the kind of sound that vibrated through bone and blood, an eruption of excitement that signaled the arrival of men the crowd revered. The sea of people stood to their feet, clapping, cheering, crying out, eager for the spectacle of faith they believed was about to unfold. Pastor Joel Osteen stood at the podium, smiling with the warm ease that had become his hallmark. His voice carried easily through the microphone, amplified by the massive sound system until it rolled like thunder across the arena. "Tonight," he announced with glowing enthusiasm, "we are blessed to welcome two extraordinary men of faith, individuals whose lives have impacted millions across the world." The crowd roared louder, whistles piercing the air, hands raised high. Joel turned, his arm extended toward the side entrance. First, Pastor Benny Hinn, whose anointed ministry of healing and hope has spanned more than 50 years. The audience erupted, applause echoing like rolling drums, voices calling his name. Benny stepped forward into the flood of light, raising one hand in a gesture of acknowledgement. His white suit gleamed beneath the spotlights, his smile calm and assured, every movement polished by decades of public ministry. Joel lifted his other hand, a twinkle in his eye, as if savoring the surprise he was about to unveil. And joining him tonight, a man known to the world for his work on screen, but known in heaven for his humility and obedience to God's calling, please welcome Keanu Reeves. The crowd's roar shifted, mingling awe with astonishment. Some gasped audibly, others shouted in excitement. Phones raised instantly to capture the moment. The unexpected pairing sent ripples through the vast space. To see Benny Hinn on stage was familiar. To see Keanu Reeves beside him was almost surreal. Yet the cheers rose without hesitation, the audience eager to witness what such an unusual collaboration might bring. Benny and Keanu walked side by side toward the chairs arranged at center stage. Cameras zoomed in, beaming their images onto massive overhead screens. Every movement, every expression was magnified for thousands to see. Benny's stride was steady, his posture upright, projecting calm authority. Keanu's steps were slower, more deliberate, his shoulders heavy beneath the unseen weight pressing down. He kept his gaze low, his hand clutching the journal so tightly his knuckles whitened under the light. They took their seats, Benny crossing his legs comfortably, glancing toward Joel with a faint smile. But his eyes drifted quickly to Keanu, who sat motionless, shoulders rigid, breathing slow and shallow. The crowd continued to cheer, their energy filling the cavernous space. But between the two men on stage, another atmosphere lingered. It was quieter, heavier, a sacred weight Benny could not name. He studied the younger man's face, noting the tautness of his jaw, the faint tremor in his hand resting against the worn leather cover of the book he carried. Something was stirring, something unseen, and Benny's spirit whispered that this night would not unfold the way anyone expected. The applause began to soften as Joel raised his hand for quiet. The crowd settled slowly, the murmur of expectation pulsing like a living heartbeat. The spotlights dimmed slightly, focusing in tighter on the three men at center stage. Joel leaned forward with his trademark smile, radiating warmth, unaware that behind the calm expressions of his guests, a spiritual storm was brewing. He began with practiced ease. "Pastor Benny, your ministry has touched millions, and tonight is yet another opportunity for people to encounter God's healing power. And Keanu, the world knows you for your films, but many don't realize how deep your faith has grown. We are eager to hear how God has been working in your life." His words hung in the air, full of optimism, as if this were any other celebratory introduction. Benny nodded politely, his hands resting easily on his lap, but his eyes betrayed distraction. He kept glancing sideways toward Keanu, sensing the man's stillness was not from nerves alone. Something in Keanu's posture unsettled him. He sat too straight, too rigid, as though bracing against a storm no one else could see. The journal on his knee seemed less like a notebook and more like a sealed vessel carrying something sacred. Keanu didn't respond immediately. His head was bowed slightly, his lips barely moving. It took Benny a moment to realize he was praying under his breath. The microphones didn't catch it, but those close enough to see knew his silence was not passive. It was deliberate. He was gathering strength, each slow breath marking the countdown to a moment he dreaded yet could no longer avoid. The audience, still buzzing with excitement, sensed the unusual pause. A hush spread gradually, curiosity rising as thousands leaned forward in their seats. The spectacle they had expected was shifting into something else, something weightier. They had come for stories, for inspiration, for words of hope and healing. But what they saw was a man visibly wrestling with invisible chains. Joel, ever the gracious host, leaned toward Keanu, offering a gentle nudge. "Would you share with us, Keanu, what this journey of faith has meant for you?" His tone was light, inviting, but the moment it touched the air, it felt as though the entire arena was holding its breath. Keanu slowly lifted his head. His eyes were darker than the lights above, full of conflict, yet sharpened by determination. He glanced briefly at Benny, locking onto him with an intensity that pierced deeper than words. Then he turned slightly toward Joel and the waiting crowd. His voice, when it came, was low and steady, though it quivered at the edges. "What I'm about to share," he said, pausing, scanning the sea of faces, "is not about me. It's not about fame. It's not even about the past. It's about a message I have carried for days, one I cannot ignore, no matter how much I wish I could." Benny's breath caught. The words were simple, but the way Keanu spoke them made his heart pound. He had heard confessions before, seen men cry out in brokenness, but this was different. The voice of the actor beside him trembled with the weight of heaven, and Benny's spirit whispered again, something sacred was unfolding. The crowd, restless with anticipation, leaned in as if 40,000 people were one body straining to hear. The cameras caught every detail, projecting Keanu's solemn face onto the massive screens overhead. His features were etched with strain, but his voice carried a quiet force that no lens could diminish. He clasped the journal tighter, his thumb running along its frayed edge, as if the touch grounded him. "For 3 nights," he said, each syllable deliberate, "I have prayed for this cup to pass from me. I have begged God to choose someone else. I told him I was not worthy, not equipped." But the voice did not relent. It came with clarity, and it came with urgency. The words sent a ripple through the arena. People shifted in their seats, whispering, glancing at one another. They hadn't come expecting prophecy. They hadn't come expecting confession. Yet here they were, caught in the stillness of a moment that felt larger than them all. Benny's eyes locked on Keanu, searching his face for exaggeration, for drama, for any trace of pretense. But there was none. He saw only the trembling hands of a man bound by obedience. Benny's own pulse began to rise, though he tried to mask it beneath calm composure. He leaned forward slightly, his fingers tightening around the Bible resting on his lap. Something in his spirit whispered that the words about to be spoken would not pass like casual remarks. They would pierce. Keanu drew in a slow breath, the microphone catching the faint hitch in his voice. "I stand here," he continued, "not as an actor, not as a public figure, but as a servant who has been given words I cannot keep to myself. And those words are for you, Pastor Hinn." Gasps rippled through the audience, soft at first, but quickly spreading like wind across a field. Joel blinked, his expression caught between intrigue and confusion, but he didn't interrupt. The camera zoomed closer, capturing the flicker in Benny's eyes as the weight of the moment pressed harder. Benny's heartbeat thudded against his ribs. He had lived through countless services, witnessed miracles beyond counting, and heard testimonies from every corner of the globe. Yet the rawness of this moment unnerved him. Keanu's voice lacked polish, lacked theatrics, but it carried something deeper, something holy. Benny swallowed, forcing his throat to loosen enough for words. "What kind of message?" he asked, his tone unsteady, almost fragile. Keanu didn't answer immediately. He closed his eyes for a moment, whispering words too quiet for the microphone to catch. When he opened them again, they glistened with unshed tears. "One that will change everything," he said finally, his voice breaking into the silence like a blade. The arena hushed to an unnatural stillness. 40,000 souls suspended between the ordinary and the divine. Benny's composure wavered, his spirit tightening with a mixture of dread and awe. He realized in that instant that the night was no longer his to control. Something greater had stepped onto the stage. Joel Osteen, seated comfortably between them, leaned forward with his familiar warmth, his voice rising above the quiet hum of the massive audience. "Keanu," he began with a gentle smile, "millions of people know you from your films, but many are surprised to see you here tonight. Could you share with us how this unexpected journey from Hollywood actor to a man walking in faith has shaped your life?" The question was light, inviting, crafted to ease the tension that hung in the air. Yet the moment Joel's words fell into the microphone, the weight in the atmosphere grew heavier, not lighter. It was as though the question itself unlocked the door Keanu had been trying to keep closed. Keanu lifted his head slowly, his dark eyes locking not on Joel but on Benny. The intensity in his gaze was unlike anything the audience had ever seen. It wasn't the glare of an actor performing a role, nor the casual glance of a man making conversation. It was sharp, unwavering, cutting through every distraction and every sound until it felt like Benny alone was seated in front of him. Benny shifted in his chair, his breath uneven. He had been studied, scrutinized, even challenged in his decades of ministry, but never had he felt the penetrating weight of eyes like these. It unsettled him in a way he could not explain, as though Keanu saw deeper than the surface, as though he had been shown things no one else should know. The arena was silent now. 40,000 people held their breath, captivated by the unexpected stillness. Every camera stayed fixed on Keanu, magnifying his face on the towering screens above the stage. The faint tremor of his lips, the tension in his jaw, even the way his hand gripped the journal on his lap, all of it was visible to the crowd, and yet none of it felt like spectacle. It felt sacred. Keanu inhaled deeply, the sound faintly caught by the microphone. His voice, when it came, was low and strained, carrying both reluctance and resolve. "A year ago," he began, "I started seeing things I couldn't explain. Dreams, visions, images of people, places, names I had never heard. At first, I ignored them. I told myself it was exhaustion, imagination, stress. But then, they started to come true." Murmurs rippled through the dying audience. Some leaned closer to their screens. Others clasped their hands, whispering prayers under their breath. Benny felt his stomach tighten, his fingers curling against the armrests of his chair. The weight of those words sank deep. He had heard many testimonies before, but something in the tone unsettled him. There was no showmanship here, no attempt at grandeur. Keanu's confession was stripped bare, and that very simplicity made it all the more powerful. Joel nodded softly, his expression shifting from curiosity to reverence. "What kind of visions?" he asked. Keanu glanced down at the leather journal resting against his knee, his thumb tracing its edge. He hesitated, his jaw tightening, as if debating whether to speak further. Then he lifted the journal slowly, holding it in both hands. The overhead screens caught the motion, broadcasting the sight of the weathered book to every corner of the arena. "I wrote them down," he said quietly. "Every single one." Keanu held the journal close to his chest, his fingers pressing into its worn leather as though it were the only anchor keeping him steady. The arena screens magnified the sight, letting every person see the creases in its cover, the frayed stitching, the faint smudges of ink that had bled through its pages. It wasn't a prop. It wasn't a performance. It was the quiet record of a man who had chosen to write instead of speak, to carry instead of reveal. Until tonight. "I never intended anyone to read this," Keanu admitted, his voice cracking slightly. "I wrote because I didn't know what else to do. I had no framework for what was happening, no way to explain it. But every time the vision came, I documented it here. And then, days or weeks later, the very things I wrote down unfolded in front of me exactly as I saw them." Gasps spread across the crowd, a wave of disbelief colliding with awe. Thousands shifted in their seats, whispering urgently to one another, but no one looked away. The raw sincerity in Keanu's tone made it impossible to dismiss. Benny leaned closer, his pulse quickening despite himself. His life had been spent around the miraculous, but the way Keanu spoke sent a chill racing through him. It was not the dramatic declaration of a man seeking attention. It was the weary confession of someone who wished he had been spared the assignment. Benny could sense it, the reluctance, the humility, the quiet fear that hung behind every word. "How many?" Benny asked, the question slipping out before he could restrain it. His own voice trembled with both curiosity and unease. "How many visions?" Keanu's eyes lifted briefly to meet his, and in that fleeting exchange, Benny saw the shadow of exhaustion in them. 28, he said simply. His words rang out clearly through the microphone, echoing across the silent arena. 28 entries, and every one of them came to pass. The room seemed to exhale as one, a collective gasp rising from 40,000 lungs. It wasn't just the number that struck them, it was the matter-of-fact way Keanu said it, with no pride, no boasting, only sorrow. His voice faltered as he continued. "I didn't ask for this. I didn't seek it. But when every vision unfolded exactly as I wrote it, I couldn't deny what was happening anymore. And 3 nights ago, the clearest message of all came." He stopped there, lowering his gaze to the journal again. His thumb rubbed the corner absently, as if the act of touching the book steadied the tremor in his hands. The arena grew quieter still. The sound of thousands breathing in unison was the only noise left, yet even that seemed hushed beneath the gravity of the moment. Benny shifted again, leaning forward with an intensity he rarely showed in public. His white suit gleamed under the lights, but for once, he felt bare. Something about Keanu's trembling restraint reached past every layer of his practiced composure. His spirit whispered what his lips dared not say aloud. This was no ordinary confession. Keanu drew in a long breath, steadying himself, as if bracing against invisible weight. The journal lay open now on his lap, pages covered in hurried scrawls, dates and names circled in thick ink. The cameras zoomed in, and the crowd could see the hurried handwriting, uneven lines that bore the mark of nights spent writing through tears. He lifted his head again, his gaze settling once more on Benny. His voice was quiet but firm. "I don't stand here because I want to. I stand here because obedience left me no choice. I never sought a stage. I never sought an audience. But when the voice of Jesus speaks, you cannot ignore it. You either obey or you live the rest of your life haunted by the silence of disobedience." The words sent a shiver through the arena. Some in the crowd wiped tears from their eyes. Others pressed hands against their mouths. It was rare to hear such vulnerability from someone known around the world for his stoic calm. Benny leaned in further, his fingers tightening on the Bible in his lap. His heart pounded against his chest, every instinct urging him to ask the question burning inside. "And what?" he whispered, his voice barely audible into the microphone. "Did he say?" Keanu's hands trembled as he closed the journal, pressing it shut as if sealing something sacred. He looked out at the audience briefly, then back at Benny, his eyes wet but unwavering. He said, "I must tell you what comes next." A wave of gasps swept across the crowd. The cameras panned between the two men, one trembling with the weight of revelation, the other frozen in dread. Benny's face paled, his composure cracking, under the realization that this moment was not performance, but prophecy. Keanu's voice grew softer, almost breaking. I have carried these words for 3 nights, pleading to be spared from speaking them. But tonight, before God and before these witnesses, I cannot remain silent, because this message was not given for me. It was given for you." The hush that fell was absolute. 40,000 people sat suspended in breathless stillness. Even the hum of the lights seemed to fade, as if creation itself leaned in. Benny's chest rose and fell in shallow breaths, his eyes locked on the man before him. Every fiber of his being longed to push away, to resist, to deny. And yet, something deeper in his spirit whispered the truth. This was no accident. Keanu closed his eyes briefly, whispering a prayer only he could hear. Then, opening them again, he looked directly at Benny and added, "And once I speak them, nothing in your life will remain the same." The crowd erupted in whispers, the sound like a storm of voices colliding. Benny's hand shook visibly as he gripped the arms of his chair. For the first time in decades, he felt the fragile tremor of fear. Something sacred and unstoppable was breaking into his world. Benny leaned forward in his chair, his eyes narrowing as he studied Keanu more closely. Over the years, he had listened to hundreds of people claim visions, dreams, and divine encounters. Some had been genuine, some had been exaggerated, and some had been nothing more than wishful imagination. But this felt different. The trembling restraint in Keanu's voice, the visible cost etched across his face, the absence of theatrics, all of it pressed against Benny's spirit with an intensity he couldn't dismiss. The arena, still brimming with 40,000 expectant souls, had grown unnaturally quiet. The kind of quiet that comes not from emptiness, but from awe. Even the technicians behind the cameras seemed frozen, their eyes fixed on the stage, sensing something that went beyond their job description. The silence pressed down heavy, as though the very air had thickened around them. Keanu shifted slightly in his seat, his hand brushing across the journal on his lap before he let it fall open again. His voice was rough, heavy, but deliberate, as he began to explain. 3 nights ago, I was in Los Angeles, staying at a hotel after a long day of interviews for a documentary. I was exhausted physically, emotionally, spiritually. I didn't want more questions. I didn't want more noise. I just wanted rest. He paused, his eyes lowering for a moment, as if reliving it. I knelt by the side of the bed, he continued softly, not even to pray for answers, but just to be still. My words weren't polished. I didn't quote scripture. I simply asked one thing. Why me? Why now? His voice cracked on the final syllable, the vulnerability cutting deeper than the most eloquent sermon. Benny felt a shiver trace his spine. He had knelt like that many times himself, but hearing Keanu describe it with such raw honesty unsettled him. This wasn't the crafted testimony of a preacher. This was a confession stripped bare, and somehow that made it even more powerful. Keanu's breathing quickened as he went on. And then, the room changed. The air itself seemed to shimmer. It didn't just feel different. It was different. I couldn't move. I couldn't explain it. Every part of me was frozen, as if the atmosphere had shifted from ordinary to eternal. He stopped briefly, swallowing hard. His eyes glistened under the stage lights, the memory still raw, still burning. Benny leaned in closer, his knuckles whitening as he gripped the Bible tighter. Around them, the audience sensed the heaviness of the moment. Some bowed their heads in silent prayer, others lifted trembling hands. The atmosphere was no longer that of a public event. It had become sacred ground. Keanu's voice dropped lower, every word weighted with conviction. And then I heard it, a voice, not from outside, not from the walls or the sky. It came from somewhere deeper, deeper than sound, deeper than thought. It was unmistakable, carrying authority I cannot describe. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't imagination. It was a commission. The words struck the arena like a thunderclap. Gasps rippled through the crowd, echoing across the vast space. Benny's pulse pounded harder, his body stiffening against the back of his chair. He had prayed his whole life to hear the voice of God, but watching Keanu describe it shook him to his core. Keanu sat straighter now, though his hands still trembled faintly against the open journal. His eyes scanned the sea of faces in the arena, then returned to Benny, as if to remind him that this story was not for the crowd, but for the man seated beside him. The voice was clear, he said, steadying his tone. Clearer than anything I've ever heard in my life. It called me by name. It said, "Keanu, you will deliver a message that is not your own." The words lingered in the air like smoke. Benny's pulse quickened. He shifted in his seat, his mind racing. He had heard testimonies of divine voices before, but hearing them spoken with this kind of trembling conviction unsettled him. He couldn't brush it aside. Something in his spirit recognized the truth of it, even as his rational mind tried to resist. Keanu pressed on, his voice cracking under the strain. I told him I wasn't worthy. I told him I wasn't a preacher, not a prophet, not someone who should carry a message like this. I begged him to give it to someone stronger, someone wiser, someone who lived their whole life in ministry. But the voice did not change. It said, "You will not refuse me. You will obey." Gasps broke out among the audience. Some lifted their hands to their mouths. Others pressed their palms together in prayer. The atmosphere felt electric, like a storm about to break. Even those who had come out of curiosity, skeptics, sitting with arms folded, leaned forward now, caught in the tension of the moment. Benny leaned closer, his white suit gleaming under the hot stage lights. His breathing grew shallow, his body tightening with unease. He had spent his life teaching obedience, but hearing the words spoken in this way cut deep, as though the command was not only for Keanu but also for him. Keanu's gaze hardened with resolve, though his voice remained soft. For 3 nights I wrestled with it. I walked the hotel floor, unable to sleep. I covered my face with my hands and begged him to release me, but each time I closed my eyes, the vision came back, the same voice, the same words, burning inside me like fire. By the 3rd night, I understood. It wasn't about whether I wanted this. It was about whether I would obey. The arena held its breath. Joel Osteen, seated nearby, watched with wide eyes, his smile gone now, replaced by a solemn awareness that something beyond human control was unfolding. Cameras zoomed in closer, capturing every flicker of emotion across Keanu's face. Benny felt his throat tighten as he whispered, almost involuntarily, "What did he say about me?" The words cracked under the strain, betraying the fear and curiosity colliding in his chest. Keanu inhaled deeply, steadying himself once more. His fingers tightened on the journal. "That," he said, his voice trembling yet unyielding, "is the part that has kept me awake ever since." The silence inside the arena deepened, thick as fog. 40,000 people leaned forward, waiting, sensing the moment was teetering on the edge of revelation. Keanu's lips parted, but no words came at first. He closed his eyes, pressing his fingertips against the leather cover of the journal as if drawing strength from its weight. When he finally spoke, his voice was hushed but resonant, carrying the tremor of both fear and obedience. "The voice," Keanu said slowly, "spoke about you, Pastor Hinn. It wasn't vague. It wasn't symbolic. It was clear and undeniable." He paused, looking straight at Benny. His eyes shimmered under the lights, brimming with the weight of what he was about to release. "It said your season of ease is coming to an end." Gasps broke out, like a wave across the audience. Some clasped their hands to their mouths. Others sat rigid, stunned into silence. Benny felt the blood drain from his face. His heart pounded against his ribs so hard he wondered if the microphones could pick it up. The phrase struck him like a thunderbolt. Season of ease. He tried to steady himself, telling his mind it couldn't be true, but something deeper within him, something no logic could silence, whispered that it was. Keanu pressed on, his words tumbling out with careful intensity. "For 3 nights I fought it. I told God it was impossible, that you've built a ministry for decades, that millions have been touched by your crusades." But the voice didn't waver. It said this wasn't about what you've done, it was about what comes next. His hands shook harder now, his knuckles white as they clutched the journal. It told me I had to deliver these words, no matter the cost, because they would set into motion something far greater than either of us can imagine. Benny's chest rose and fell quickly, his composure unraveling. He gripped the arms of his chair, staring at Keanu with wide eyes. In all his years of ministry, he had stood through storms of criticism, through the fire of public opinion, but nothing had pierced him like this. This wasn't the voice of an enemy. This wasn't accusation. It was a message that rang with the sound of heaven itself, and that was what terrified him most. The atmosphere on stage thickened until it felt sacred, untouchable. The crowd no longer moved. Even the cameras seemed to hold their focus with reverence, capturing a moment that felt more like divine appointment than broadcast. Joel Osteen sat frozen, his usual words of encouragement caught in his throat. Keanu's voice dropped to a near whisper, yet it carried to every corner of the arena. Pastor Hinn, this is not the end of your calling, but it is the end of the life you've known. What lies ahead will demand more of you than anything that came before. And the world will see that even a man who has touched millions must sometimes be called into the shadows, where only God Himself bears witness. The words hung like a heavy curtain between them, and Benny's eyes burned with tears he could no longer hold back. The tension in the arena could no longer be mistaken for anything ordinary. It wasn't simply anticipation. It was a heaviness that seemed to press down on every soul present. Benny sat stiff in his chair, gripping the armrest so tightly that the veins in his hands stood out. His pulse thundered in his ears. His mind screamed to maintain composure, but his body betrayed him with shallow, uneven breaths. Keanu looked at him, his expression filled with compassion yet unflinching in its resolve. His voice was low but steady, each syllable deliberate. The voice did not call you Pastor Hinn. It did not call you Benny. It called you by the name you were born with. He paused, his eyes locked on Benny's, allowing the words to sink in. It said, Tufic Benedictus Hinn, I have not forgotten who you are. The sound of the name detonated like thunder in Benny's chest. His heart lurched violently. He gasped audibly, his face draining of color. His body jerked slightly forward as though struck by an invisible blow. That name, a name buried for decades, a name known only to a handful of family and long-forgotten records, hung exposed now before tens of thousands of witnesses. Gasps spread through the crowd. Many looked at each other in confusion, unaware of the significance, but they felt the impact through Benny's reaction. The cameras zoomed in mercilessly, capturing the shock etched across his trembling face. His lips parted, but no words came. His composure, the one he had spent 50 years perfecting before global audiences, cracked like glass. Keanu's tone softened, but grew heavier with each word. He said, your time of comfort is drawing to a close. He said the stage, the lights, the applause, all of it has been a season of grace, but that season is ending. What comes next will not be measured in crowds or in broadcasts. It will be measured in sacrifice. Benny's breathing quickened. His hands gripped the arms of his chair until his knuckles went white. His eyes blinked rapidly, moisture gathering despite his effort to restrain it. He wanted to speak, to object, to deny, but his voice refused to obey. The sacred weight of hearing his birth name on Keanu's lips, spoken as if heaven itself had whispered it was too much to bear. The arena trembled with murmurs. Some clasped hands in prayer. Others stared wide-eyed at the stage, unable to believe what they were witnessing. This was no ordinary message. This was revelation cutting through the veil of secrecy, exposing something no human could fabricate. Keanu leaned closer, his gaze unwavering. He said he is calling you into the shadows. He said your ministry of visibility is ending, and your ministry of secrecy is beginning. He said the greatest miracles you will ever see will not be broadcast on television, but whispered in hidden rooms where only the desperate gather to pray. Benny's chest heaved as though every breath was a struggle. The weight of those words pressed against him like a mountain. Deep within, he felt the undeniable tremor of truth, even as every part of his mind begged to resist. Benny's throat tightened, and for a moment he thought he might choke. That name, his birth name, had been buried under layers of identity, ministry, and decades of transformation. Even his closest staff had never heard it. He had shed it long ago, exchanging Tufik Benedictus Hinn for the name that would become recognized in arenas and on television screens around the world. To hear it spoken now, spoken publicly, spoken by a man who could not have known it, felt like standing naked before the throne of heaven itself. Keanu didn't look away. His voice carried both compassion and unshakable weight. The Lord said, "You've built an empire of light and sound." He said, "You have reached millions, touched nations, and stood before presidents and kings." But he also said, "You cannot stay where you are. Your assignment has shifted." Benny's lips parted as if to speak, but the words caught in his throat. His pulse hammered faster, his body trembling under the realization that what he was hearing was no ordinary testimony. This was precise, personal, inescapable. He wanted to dismiss it as coincidence, but there was no way. His birth name was proof enough that heaven itself was speaking. Keanu's hands pressed flat against the journal, as if anchoring himself against the weight of what he carried. His voice dropped lower, every syllable deliberate. He said, "Benny has honored me on stages, but now I will honor him in secret places. He will no longer stand in stadiums filled with thousands. He will kneel in hidden rooms filled with dozens. And in those rooms, my power will fall in ways the cameras could never capture." The crowd erupted in murmurs, many clutching their chests, some openly weeping. The cameras zoomed closer to Benny's face, showing his composure unraveling in real time. His eyes glistened, his jaw clenched, his hands shook uncontrollably. Inside, Benny's thoughts collided in chaos. Could this be true? Could God really be asking him to step away from the life he had built for half a century? Could the crusades, the broadcasts, the endless crowds, all of it really have been preparation for something hidden, something unseen? His heart screamed in protest, but his spirit trembled with the sting of recognition. Keanu leaned in slightly, his voice softening but no less piercing. He said, "You will lay down the spotlight. You will walk away from applause. You will step into obscurity, where no one will know your name, but heaven will know your obedience." He said the next chapter of your life will not make headlines, but it will shake eternity. Benny's chest rose and fell unevenly. His mind grasped at memories of miracles, of healings, of moments when the power of God had swept through crowds. But now, confronted with this message, he realized with dawning clarity that perhaps all of it had been training. Training not for more fame, but for more surrender. The silence that followed was deafening. 40,000 people sat frozen, their eyes locked on the stage, waiting for Benny's response. Benny's hands trembled so violently that he released his grip on the chair arms and clasped them together in his lap, hoping the cameras wouldn't capture his weakness. But they did. The lenses zoomed in, unrelenting, broadcasting his unraveling to the massive crowd and millions more watching at home. His chest heaved, his mind spinning, yet a voice deep inside whispered what his pride didn't want to admit. This was real. Keanu's eyes glistened, his own body shaking under the weight of what he carried. The Lord said, "You measure your ministry by what you can see: the lights, the cameras, the crowds. But He measures your ministry by the unseen, by the ones the world forgets." He said, "Tufik, I am calling you from the platforms of power into the places of persecution. You will serve those who cannot announce your name, but they will know mine because of you." The crowd erupted in gasps and cries. Some stood to their feet, hands raised in awe. Others sank to their knees in prayer. The energy inside the arena shifted from curiosity to holy fear. It was no longer a gathering, it was an altar. Benny's face contorted as he lowered his head, hiding his eyes with one trembling hand. His pulse pounded so loud he could barely hear. The word Tufik echoed inside him like thunder. No one had spoken it in more than 40 years, and now it rang out before the nations. He had buried that name to step into a ministry identity, yet God had unearthed it in front of the world, reminding him that heaven knew him more deeply than any title could. Keanu pressed on, his voice breaking, yet he would not stop. He said, "You must walk away from the safety of what you've built. The cameras will turn off, the stages will empty. But in the hidden places, in the basements and back rooms of the persecuted church, you will see miracles that eclipse everything you've known, and you will discover joy greater than any applause." Tears spilled freely down Benny's cheeks now, his body trembling. The words shredded every defense he had left. He wanted to deny them, to argue, to insist that his ministry had always been enough. But deep within, he knew. He had felt it for years, the quiet ache that there was something more, something beyond the lights and the endless travel. The cameras caught every flicker of his breaking. His head bowed, his shoulders slumped, his chest rose and fell with ragged breaths. The crowd knew they were witnessing something historic. The collapse of a man's composure under the unbearable weight of a holy call. And still Keanu's voice, trembling but resolute, carried the final words for that moment. The Lord said, "Benny believes he has already given me everything, but now I will show him what it means to give me his life." The arena fell into hushed silence. Benny's tears dripped onto the white fabric of his suit, marking him forever changed. Keanu let his hand rest on the leather journal that had not left his side since that night in Los Angeles. He hesitated, eyes closing briefly as if to gather strength, then opened it with deliberate care. The audience leaned forward, the sound of paper rustling echoing unnaturally in the hushed arena. "This journal," Keanu began, his voice low but unwavering, is filled with visions, dreams, and words I never wanted to write. I kept them here because I didn't trust myself to remember everything. And yet, every line written has come to pass exactly as it was shown to me. Tonight, I must read words that are not for the crowd, but for you, Pastor Hinn. He turned a few pages, stopping at an entry scrawled in heavy strokes. His eyes scanned it, then he lifted his head and looked directly at Benny. 18 months ago, in your study, you sat with your wife. You told her something you've never repeated in public. You said that despite all the miracles, despite the arenas and the broadcasts, something inside you felt incomplete. Benny's head jerked upward, his eyes wide, his pulse pounded violently. He clutched the arms of his chair, his chest rising and falling with short, uneven breaths. That conversation late at night, behind closed doors, was not known to anyone but Suzanne. His voice trembled, but no sound came. Keanu pressed forward, his tone steady, though his eyes glistened with compassion. You told her, if God asked me, I would give up the Crusades. I just don't understand what more he could want. The words slammed into Benny like a hammer striking glass. His composure cracked further, his lips quivering, tears spilling despite his desperate attempt to hold them back. Gasps swept across the audience as they watched his face, realizing that what Keanu spoke could not possibly have been fabricated. The cameras zoomed in tight. Benny's eyes darted across the crowd, then back at Keanu, a question burning but unspoken. He know. Keanu lowered his gaze to the journal again, turning another page with trembling fingers. And 2 weeks ago, he continued softly, you had a dream. You saw yourself in a concrete room, dimly lit, with men and women speaking in a tongue you did not understand. You weren't wearing your white suit. You weren't holding a microphone. You were kneeling among them, your hands lifted. And in that dream, you felt closer to God than you have ever felt beneath the lights of any stage. Benny's body convulsed with a visible shudder. His hands covered his face, his shoulders shaking as sobs broke through. That dream had haunted him for days. He had told no one, not his wife, not his closest advisors. And yet here it was, spoken aloud before tens of thousands, every detail exact. Benny's disbelief battled with a growing recognition. Heaven had unveiled his most private secrets. Benny's fingers trembled as they pressed against his face, muffling the sound of his uneven breathing. He lowered his hands slowly, his eyes red, his jaw slack with shock. The crowd could see it. This wasn't acting. This wasn't dramatics. It was the look of a man who had been pierced to the core by words no human could have known. Keanu kept his gaze steady, though his voice was weighted with sorrow. "Pastor Hinn, I resisted reading these entries. I begged God to spare me from saying them out loud. But he told me, 'Speak what I've shown you, because only then will Benny know it is I who speaks, not man.'" He turned another page in the journal, his hand shaking. "You prayed one night not long ago, when no one else was near. You said, 'Lord, I don't know why you still use me. I am older now. My strength fades, my voice shakes. Yet I feel like you're preparing me for something that will require more faith than I've ever had before." Benny gasped, his chest heaving, as though the words themselves stole the air from his lungs. That prayer had been whispered in the stillness of midnight, a confession too fragile to share even with Suzanne. Hearing it spoken now in front of thousands made his entire body tremble. Keanu's eyes softened, though his tone remained resolute. "You asked him if the Crusades had only been a chapter, not the whole book. You said you would surrender them if he asked, though you did not understand what more he could require." The crowd erupted in shocked murmurs. Many rose to their feet in awe, hands clasped together, whispering prayers as tears rolled down their faces. The cameras captured every angle: Benny shaking, Keanu trembling, Joel Osteen seated motionless, his face pale as the realization sank in that this was more than testimony. Benny's thoughts spun wildly. How could this man, this actor he barely knew, speak the exact words of his private cries? How could he describe conversations that had never been recorded, never been repeated, never been written down? His heart told him the answer he dreaded. God was speaking. Keanu's hand lingered on the journal as he whispered the next line. "And the Lord showed me your dream in detail, the one from 2 weeks ago. You told no one, but he revealed it to me, so you would know his voice. You saw yourself hidden underground, surrounded by believers whose language you did not recognize. They worshipped in whispers, not shouts. And yet, in that dream, you felt his presence thicker than in any stadium you've ever entered." Benny's head dropped forward, tears streaming freely, soaking the fabric of his suit. The weight of revelation was too much. He could no longer hold the posture of the confident healer. He was a man undone, trembling before the God who knew every secret thought of his heart. The arena had grown so still that even the hum of the stage lights seemed swallowed by silence. Every eye was locked on the two men, one reading from a weathered journal, the other unraveling under the weight of its words. Keanu's voice lowered to a near whisper, though the microphones carried it across every corner of the stadium. "The Lord said these things were not revealed to expose you, but to confirm that his hand has been on you even in your hidden struggles. He said, 'Benny thinks his calling is complete, but I am only beginning the work I destined him for.'" Benny's lips quivered, his throat tightened until his breathing came in shallow bursts. He wanted to resist, to tell himself it was impossible. The conversation in his study, the whispered prayer in the dead of night, the dream that had haunted him, these had been sealed within his soul, shared with no one. And yet they were laid bare now by a man who could not possibly know. His pulse thundered, his body trembling visibly. He lifted a hand to his mouth as tears streamed unchecked. The camera zoomed in close, capturing the raw collapse of composure. The unmasking of a man long accustomed to controlling every gesture on stage. Keanu turned another page of the journal, his hands trembling as though each line burned with fire. "The Lord showed me how your spirit wrestled with incompleteness. He told me you've carried it like a wound no crowd could heal, no miracle could silence. He said that when you told Suzanne you would surrender even the Crusades if asked, heaven took notice. And now the time of that surrender has come." A wave of gasps swept the arena. Many stood to their feet, tears flowing, hands raised in reverence. Others fell to their knees, unable to contain the gravity of the moment. The entire stadium had become a sanctuary, every spectator transformed into a witness of something eternal. Then he shook his head slowly, as if fighting against the tide pulling him under. His voice, cracked and weak, finally broke through. No one knew. No one. The words tumbled out more to himself than to the crowd, but they carried through the microphones, echoing across the silent arena. Keanu's eyes brimmed with tears as he closed the journal, resting his palm firmly upon its cover. His voice steadied with finality. No one knew, but he knew, and he revealed it so that you would recognize his voice tonight. You asked for confirmation. This is it. Your secrets have become his sign. Benny's shoulders convulsed as sobs overtook him. The crowd wept with him. The cameras capturing history as one of the world's most famous ministers trembled beneath the weight of divine revelation. The tension between disbelief and recognition had broken. What remained was surrender. The sobs still shook Benny's frame, his hands clutching his lap as he tried to steady himself. His body trembled like a man caught in the grip of both awe and terror. The audience sat frozen, their attention hanging on every word, as though the very air inside the arena had become a sanctuary. Keanu rested his palm once more on the closed journal. His head lowered briefly, and when he lifted his eyes again, they shimmered with the same weight of obedience that had marked every word so far. His voice, though quiet, carried to the furthest corner of the building. There is more, Pastor Hinn. The Lord did not only reveal who you are and what He is calling you into, He also gave me a timeline. A wave of murmurs rippled through the crowd, like the rustling of leaves in a sudden wind. 40,000 men and women leaned forward, the tension in their faces clear. Even Joel Osteen, seated slightly behind the two men, shifted nervously, his hands clasped as if holding on to something unseen. Benny lifted his tear-streaked face. His lips trembled as he forced out a whisper, barely audible. A timeline? Keanu nodded solemnly. His hand pressed firmly over the journal as if steadying it against invisible weight. Yes, he said that in exactly 35 days, you will receive a sign. Not vague, not symbolic, an irrefutable sign that will leave you with no doubt about the calling he has spoken tonight. The audience gasped, audibly. The sheer precision of the number struck them with force. 35 days. Not months, not years, days. The countdown had already begun. The holy weight of a divine clock ticking over their heads settled into the room, and the silence deepened even further. Benny's chest rose and fell with quick, uneven breaths. His heart thundered, his mind spinning with questions. At last he managed to whisper, "What kind of sign?" His voice cracked with desperation, every syllable laced with the terror of a man afraid of what obedience might cost. Keanu hesitated. His lips parted, but for a long moment, no words came. He closed his eyes, as though wrestling once more with the burden. His hands shook visibly, and the cameras caught every tremor. When he finally spoke, his words came slowly, each one deliberate, each one shaking the hearts of those who heard. "The sign," Keanu said, "will involve someone you cherish more than your own life." Gasps filled the arena like a thunderclap. Some covered their mouths, others pressed their palms together in prayer. The weight of the words was unbearable, a holy tension that stretched like a bowstring drawn to its limit. The audience knew they were standing on sacred ground, watching something unfold that no human could orchestrate. Benny's eyes widened, his entire body stiffening. His mind raced through the names of those he loved most, his wife, his children, his family. Fear and reverence collided in his chest, each breath a struggle against the dread of what might be demanded. He shook his head faintly, unable to form words, yet unable to look away from Keanu's piercing gaze. Keanu's voice softened, though the intensity did not fade. "He said you would not be able to mistake it. When the sign comes, you will. No. You will not wonder if it is from him. You will not question. It will be so overwhelming, so miraculous, that even the deepest skeptic will bow to its truth." The crowd stirred in awe, the murmur of thousands blending into something that sounded like thunder rolling through the arena. A countdown had been declared, and the tension of that approaching day gripped every soul present. Benny pressed a trembling hand to his chest, feeling his heart pound against his ribs. He leaned forward, whispering again, this time more broken, more desperate. Why someone I love?" Keanu's eyes glistened with tears. His lips trembled as he answered, "Because love is the one place where surrender cannot be faked." He said the sign must touch what you cherish most, so that the surrender will not be shallow but complete. The words cut through Benny like a blade. His shoulders hunched, his body trembling, his mind torn between fear and awe. Benny's body shook as he leaned back in his chair. His hand pressed hard against his chest. His pulse hammered like a war drum, and his breathing came fast and shallow. He wanted to resist, to argue, to tell himself this was too much, but deep in his spirit he knew these were not words of men. This was God reaching into the deepest places of his life. Keanu's hands trembled as he continued, his voice quivering yet steady with conviction. The Lord said that on the 35th day, the sign will come like a lightning strike across your soul. It will arrive through the one you least expect, the one whose heart has remained far from faith. And when it happens, you will know that the words spoken tonight are not mine, but his. The audience erupted in gasps. Thousands leaned forward, their eyes wide, as though trying to see the unseen future already written. Some clasped hands and prayed aloud. Others shook their heads in disbelief, caught between awe and fear. The atmosphere had become so thick with tension, it was almost unbearable. Benny lowered his head, his shoulders trembling. He whispered, barely audible into the microphone, "Lord, give me strength." The words weren't meant for the audience, yet they carried across the arena, echoing through the speakers. Many in the crowd wept openly, sensing the raw honesty of a man undone before their eyes. Keanu's eyes shimmered with tears as he spoke the final words of the moment. "Pastor Hinn, the Lord said this sign is not meant to punish you. It is meant to prepare you. He said it will break you so that he can remake you. It will strip away fear so that only faith remains. And when that day arrives, you will not stand in doubt, you will fall in surrender." The silence that followed was deafening. Every heart in the arena seemed to pound in unison, waiting for what could not yet be seen but was already certain. Benny's tears fell unchecked, his hands trembling in his lap, his spirit caught between terror and a dawning recognition that his life would never be the same. The countdown had begun. 35 days. The silence in the arena was suffocating, every soul frozen in expectation. Benny's chest heaved as he tried to steady himself, but his hands shook uncontrollably in his lap. His body bore the weight of dread and awe colliding all at once. He had heard the word sign, but now the question lingered, louder than the roar of any crowd. What could possibly be so specific, so undeniable, that it would shatter the last defenses of his heart? Keanu's eyes softened, but his voice carried the fire of obedience. He leaned forward, the journal still resting on his lap, and spoke slowly, carefully, as though each word was drawn straight from heaven. "The Lord told me the sign will not come through a preacher. It will not come through a prophet. It will not even come through a believer. It will come through your nephew, Michael." Benny's head snapped up, his eyes wide with shock. The name hit him harder than a physical blow. Michael, his sister's son, respectful, intelligent, successful in business, but always skeptical of faith. Michael had never accepted the miraculous. He had kept his distance from healing crusades, avoiding conversations about prayer, dismissing talk of visions as emotional exaggeration. If anyone in the family was least likely to speak a divine message, it was him. Benny's lips parted, his voice trembling as he whispered, "Michael?" Keanu nodded, his tone filled with compassion yet firm as stone. "Yes, on the 35th day, he will call you. And when he does, he will not be the same man you knew before. Because the Lord said he would give Michael a dream so vivid, so precise that even the skeptic will have no choice but to speak it. And when you hear it, Pastor Hinn, you will know beyond doubt that every word spoken tonight is true." Gasps broke out across the crowd. Many clasped their hands, whispering prayers under their breath. The thought of a skeptic turned into an unwitting messenger of heaven was too astonishing to ignore. Benny's breathing quickened. His pulse thundered in his ears. His heart ached with both fear and longing. For years, he had prayed for Michael's salvation, but never once imagined that his nephew could be chosen as the vessel for a prophecy like this. Keanu lifted the journal and read from one of the pages, his voice trembling. "The Lord said Michael will describe the dream in detail. He will see you standing in an underground church in China. The room will be hidden, dimly lit, filled with men, women, and children dressed simply. Their voices will rise in a language Michael does not know, but he will say it sounded like Chinese. He will see you kneeling among them, not in your white suit, not holding a microphone, but with your hands raised in worship." Benny's face contorted, his entire body shuddering. His vision blurred with tears, his lungs struggling for air. The words pierced him like blades. Every detail struck too close to the dream he had experienced weeks earlier. The memory surged back the hidden room, the whispers in a language foreign to him, the overwhelming sense of God's presence. He had tried to dismiss it as a symbolic vision, but now it was being confirmed in public with terrifying precision. The crowd reacted audibly, some breaking into weeping, others bowing their heads in reverent silence. It was clear to them that this was no coincidence. The holy weight of prophecy hung over the stage like a storm. Keanu's voice cracked as he read the next line. "And in the dream, Michael will see a little girl. She will be blind, born that way. She will stand before you, her small hands reaching out in trust, and as you pray over her, light will pour from your hands, real light. Her eyes will open, and for the first time in her life, she will see." The arena erupted in gasps, cries, and prayers. People stood with their hands lifted. Others fell to their knees, overwhelmed by the sheer beauty and terror of the image. Cameras zoomed in on Benny's face, showing his convulsing body, his trembling lips, his tears flowing freely. Benny clutched his chest, as though his heart might give out. The impossible details, his nephew, the underground church, the blind girl, struck him with force no logic could deny. His defenses, once so strong, crumbled beneath the weight of revelation. The arena trembled with the sound of thousands whispering prayers, yet all eyes remained fixed on the stage. Benny's body shook as he leaned forward, clutching the edge of his chair as though he might collapse. His heart raced, his mind whirled, and his spirit broke under the crushing clarity of what he was hearing. Keanu's voice softened, trembling with the weight of each word. "The Lord said this would be the sign that even the hardest skeptic cannot deny. Michael, the one who has doubted all his life, will call you and tell you this dream. And when he speaks, he will repeat words he could not possibly know." The arena stilled again, every soul holding its breath. Benny's lips quivered as he whispered hoarsely, "What words?" Keanu's eyes glistened with tears. He closed the journal slowly, as if sealing the gravity of heaven itself, then lifted his gaze to Benny with unflinching resolve. His voice broke, yet carried through the microphones with piercing clarity. He will say 3 words in Mandarin, words he has never studied, never spoken, never heard before. He will say, "Yesu I ni," and they mean, "Jesus loves you." The crowd erupted, gasps, cries, hands raised in awe. Some wept openly, others shouted prayers, unable to contain the weight of the moment. The sound rolled through the arena like a tidal wave. Yet the center of the storm remained silent. Benny Hinn, convulsing in his chair, his face pale, his lips trembling as the impossible pierced every barrier of his heart. Those words, foreign, sacred, undeniable, landed like fire. Benny's body shook violently. He pressed both hands to his face, sobs tearing from him as the holy tension shattered the last of his defenses. He had dreamed of hidden rooms, of whispered worship, of light breaking into the dark. But to hear that his skeptical nephew would confirm it with words only heaven could give, it was too much to bear. Keanu leaned closer, his own voice breaking as he delivered the final line. "When you hear Michael speak those words, you will know the Lord himself has called you. Not to crowds, not to cameras, but to the hidden church, where love is whispered in shadows and miracles burn brighter than lights." Benny collapsed forward, his sobs echoing through the microphone, his entire body undone before God. The crowd, seeing it unfold, fell into reverent silence. The prophecy had been spoken, the sign had been unveiled, and every soul present knew they had witnessed the holy unraveling of a man before the unstoppable will of heaven. Benny's whole frame began to quake. His trembling was no longer hidden. It rippled through his arms, his shoulders, even the tilt of his head. He gripped the arms of his chair so tightly that his knuckles blanched white under the heat of the stage lights. His lips parted, but for a long moment, no words came. His body shook under the weight of a truth too heavy to carry, and his composure collapsed in full view of the world. Finally, his voice broke through, weak and splintered. How can I do this?" His eyes glistened with tears that streamed unchecked down his cheeks. "How can I abandon everything? The ministry, my staff, the millions of souls who depend on this work?" His chest heaved as sobs threatened to overtake him. "It is not just me, Keanu. Thousands of people, families, children, their very lives are tied to this ministry. How can I walk away? How can I lay this down?" The arena echoed with hushed cries. Many bowed their heads in prayer. Others wiped their own tears as they watched a man who had stood unshaken. Before presidents and kings now tremble like a child in need. Keanu's expression softened. The sharp edge of prophecy gave way to a tender steadiness. His tone shifted not thunder now, but balm. His voice carried pastoral weight, each word like a hand reaching gently toward Benny's breaking spirit. "Pastor Hinn," he said quietly, "the Lord knew you would ask that question. He told me to tell you this: do not fear for your staff. Do not fear for the work. He will provide for every one of them. He will raise up new shepherds to continue the work that was begun." Benny's body jolted as if struck, his face contorting with sobs. His hands released the chair arms only to press against his chest, as though trying to contain a heart breaking wide open. His voice shook as he pleaded again. "But the weight of it, do you understand what you are asking of me? 50 years of building, of carrying this calling, of feeding the world. How can it all just stop?" Keanu leaned closer, his eyes shimmering with tears of his own. "It will not stop. It will shift. What you built will not vanish." The Lord said, "What Benny has planted will continue to grow, but I am calling him to sow in a different field." He said the staff will not be abandoned. Their provision is in his hands, not yours. Their calling is safe in his plan, not yours. You are being asked to release, not to destroy. The cameras caught every moment Benny's convulsing sobs, Keanu's steady tears. Joel Osteen sitting beside them in stunned silence, his hands clasped tight as he struggled to comprehend what he was witnessing. Joel, known for his words of encouragement, found none now. His lips pressed together, his face pale, as if he too recognized this was no ordinary moment of ministry, but something sacred and terrifying in its clarity. The crowd shifted restlessly, torn between awe and fear, their whispers filling the cavernous arena. Yet the focus remained fixed on the two men at the center, one trembling under the call to surrender, the other trembling under the burden of delivering it. Benny's voice wavered as he lifted his head toward Keanu, tears spilling down his face. His hands shook as he raised them, palms open as if begging for mercy. "If I let go," he whispered, "what becomes of me? What becomes of my purpose? Will the world not say I failed? That I was deceived? That I quit when the world still needed me?" Keanu's eyes softened further, his voice dropping into a gentle rhythm that carried more comfort than command. "The Lord said to tell you this: your purpose is not tied to platforms, not chained to cameras, not measured by numbers. He said, Benny's purpose has always been love, and I am calling him into the purest form of it. The millions will not be abandoned. They were never yours to hold. They were always mine." The words landed like a flood breaking through a dam. Benny convulsed forward, his elbows on his knees, his face buried in his hands. His sobs echoed through the microphone, filling the arena with raw humanity. This was not the polished preacher the crowd had known for decades. This was a man broken at the feet of the very God he had served. Joel Osteen sat beside him, still frozen, his normally radiant expression subdued into silence. For the first time in his long career, he had no words of encouragement to offer. His wide eyes and clenched jaw betrayed the awe and fear in his heart. He glanced toward the crowd, then back at the trembling figure beside him, realizing that he too was witnessing history, an unraveling of faith, and the remaking of a man. Keanu reached across the space between them, resting a steadying hand on Benny's shoulder. The contact was tender, almost fatherly, yet it carried the strength of a man certain of the message he bore. The Lord said he would not leave you without comfort. He said when you release what is in your hand, he will place something greater there. Not greater in fame, not greater in numbers, but greater in weight of eternity. He said your last chapter will not be smaller than your first, it will be deeper. Benny's shoulders shook as the words washed over him. He lifted his face, streaked with tears, eyes wide and broken. "How can I bear it?" he asked, his voice trembling like a child's. Keanu's tone steadied with quiet authority. "Not by your strength, by his." The arena fell completely silent, every heart holding its breath. The sight of Benny's collapse, his surrender, and Keanu's unwavering gentleness etched itself into the memory of all who watched. It was as if the ground itself had shifted beneath them. Benny sat trembling, undone, clutching the edge of his chair as if the earth itself might give way. The truth was clear: his faith had collapsed, but in its ruins, something new was being born. Benny still trembled, his face buried in his hands, when Keanu's voice cut softly through the silence. It no longer carried the heavy thunder of prophecy, nor the gentle balm of pastoral care alone. It carried something deeply personal, something that reached into the hidden places of marriage and love. "Pastor Hinn," Keanu said slowly, "the Lord told me you have not walked this path alone. For over a year now, your wife has been kneeling in secret, praying for the very shift he is confirming tonight." Benny froze. His hands lowered from his face, just enough to reveal eyes that widened in stunned disbelief. His chest rose sharply, as though the words had knocked the wind from him. "Suzanne?" he whispered, his lips quivering. Keanu nodded with steady certainty. "Yes, Suzanne. The Lord said her prayers have changed. That once she prayed for greater strength for you to keep carrying the stage, the crusades, the spotlight. But then she began to pray differently. She began asking him not to enlarge the stage, but to lead you into stillness. She prayed that you would find freedom from the weight of the crowds and step into the hidden places where his heart longs for you." The crowd gasped softly. The words carried a piercing intimacy, describing not grand crusades but quiet intercessions whispered in hidden rooms. The revelation struck Benny like lightning. He thought of her kneeling beside the bed at night, her soft voice carrying words he could never quite hear. He remembered her hand resting gently on his arm when he was weary, her eyes filled with something unspoken. He realized now she hadn't been praying for strength to continue. She had been praying for release. His body convulsed as sobs broke loose again. But this time, they were different. They were not driven by terror of loss or fear of failure, but by the unbearable weight of truth and confirmation. He whispered brokenly into the microphone. She knew. She already knew. Keanu's gaze did not waver. His voice carried quiet strength. "The Lord said she was your confirmation. That when you doubted whether these visions were real, you would look at her prayers and recognize he had already been preparing your house. He said she would be the anchor when the storm of surrender felt too violent." The arena grew impossibly silent. 40,000 people sat breathless, tears flowing freely, watching the unraveling of a man's soul as love itself became the final seal of prophecy. "So all this time, she has been carrying me in prayer, asking God to bring me here." His voice cracked, the realization washing over him like a tidal wave. Not a call only, but a confirmation. The camera zoomed in, capturing every detail. His quivering lips, the glistening tears on his cheeks. the raw collapse of a man undone not just by God's word, but by the faithful intercession of the woman who knew him best. Tears poured from Benny's eyes, but now they flowed not from fear, not from the terror of surrender, but from the overwhelming assurance that this was not madness or misdirection. This was love, God's love, Suzanne's love, heaven's love, weaving together as confirmation. Benny sat motionless for a long moment, his chest rising and falling in heavy waves, his eyes locked on nothing in particular. He looked as though he were staring into the past through decades of ministry, through years of prayers, through nights when Suzanne's soft voice had slipped into his spirit like oil on a wound. Now the meaning of it all came crashing into focus. With trembling lips he whispered, "She prayed me here. She saw this before I did." His voice cracked, carrying into the microphone so the entire arena could hear the confession. It was not the confident tone of a world-renowned evangelist, but the broken recognition of a husband suddenly aware of the quiet strength that had carried him when he was 5. Blind. Keanu leaned closer, his eyes steady and filled with compassion. The Lord said Suzanne's prayers were not born of fear, but of faith. She saw your weariness. She saw how the stage consumed you, and she asked him to free you. She prayed not that you would shine brighter under lights, but that you would walk deeper into his presence. The words pierced Benny again, this time with a gentler pain. He pressed a hand to his chest, his body shaking as tears fell. His heart felt as though it were splitting open, not under judgment, but under love. Love that had been patiently waiting for him in the prayers of his wife. The crowd wept openly now. Many couples held hands, husbands and wives leaning into each other as though Suzanne's unseen intercession spoke into their marriages too. The cameras caught the intimacy of the moment, 40,000 people watching, but each feeling as though heaven itself had turned the lens toward their own lives. Joel Osteen remained in stunned silence. His wide eyes glistened, his hands folded tightly in his lap. He had preached for years about God's blessings, God's favor, God's goodness. But tonight he sat witness to something deeper. A love so specific, so holy, that even his polished words failed him. Benny's sobs grew softer, shifting into a broken smile. His face glowed with tears, but there was no longer only dread in his eyes. There was recognition, gratitude, and the dawning peace of a man who finally understood he had not been alone in this battle. "She knew," he whispered again, his voice cracking. "She carried me when I did not even know I needed carrying." Keanu placed a hand gently on Benny's arm, his tone steady but tender. "And tonight, the Lord confirms it. This calling is not just yours. It belongs to your marriage. It belongs to the prayers of a woman who never stopped believing for you. You are not stepping into this alone. You are stepping into what she has already made room for in heaven." The arena remained hushed, the atmosphere drenched in reverence. Tears flowed freely, not only from Benny, but from thousands who felt as though they too had been ushered into the holy secret of marriage, prayer, and divine confirmation. Benny lowered his head once more, tears spilling onto his hands. They were tears of truth, tears that marked the breaking of chains, the lifting of doubt, and the assurance that this was not only a call, but a confirmation sealed in the love of his wife. Benny's tears still flowed, but his sobs had quieted into long, heavy breaths. His body shook less violently now, though his face bore the raw imprint of everything he had just heard. He sat hunched forward, eyes red, hands clasped loosely together, as if he were bracing for whatever came next. Keanu leaned slightly closer, his voice steady but tender, carrying the weight of reassurance rather than rebuke. "Pastor Hinn," he said softly, "the Lord told me to explain why. He said the 50 years behind you were not wasted, not an accident, not merely a prelude to the end. They were training for something deeper than you imagined." Benny lifted his face, his expression torn between exhaustion and desperate curiosity. His lips parted, but no words came. His silence was answer enough for Keanu to continue. "The Lord said the miracles will not end. They will not cease, but they will move underground. He said, I am calling Benny from the lights of the arena into the shadows where my persecuted children hide. The signs and wonders that drew crowds will now ignite fires in secret places. Gasps rose from the audience. Some clasped their hands together, eyes wide with wonder. Others pressed tissues to their cheeks, tears flowing as they realized what this meant, that the same power displayed on global stages would now be poured into hidden corners of the earth. Benny's chest rose sharply, his eyes widening. His lips trembled as the weight of the words sank in. His mind spun with memories of decades under stadium lights, of countless miracles witnessed by thousands, of applause, of headlines, of fame. And yet here he was, being told it was not the climax, but the foundation, that his true assignment lay not in the spotlight, but in the shadows. Keanu's tone deepened, his eyes shining with conviction. He said, this is not a demotion. This is not retirement. This is a promotion into the very heart of his mission. He said, the arena's trained you for courage, for boldness, for obedience. But now he is sending you into places where obedience will cost more and mean more. You will not lose your calling. You will fulfill it. Benny gasped, his body trembling. His tears fell again, but mingled with them was something new, something like the faint flicker of revelation breaking through the grief. For the first time that night, his sobs were interrupted by sharp, shallow laughs of disbelief, astonished, broken chuckles, as though the truth was too vast to comprehend. You mean... His voice cracked. You mean it was all preparation? Keanu nodded firmly. Every stage, every crusade, every broadcast, none of it was wasted. It was training ground. The Lord said, your identity is not celebrity healer, but hidden servant. He is redefining you not as the man who drew millions to the stage, but the man who will bring his presence into places no spotlight can ever reach. The arena shook with holy awe. People stood, hands lifted, tears pouring as they watched revelation dawn on a man who had given his life to ministry, but was now discovering its truest purpose. Benny pressed both hands against his chest, his head shaking slowly, tears streaming freely. His voice trembled as he whispered, hidden servant. He repeated it again, as though the words themselves burned through decades of pride and performance. Hidden servant. Benny rocked gently in his seat, whispering the phrase again, each repetition softer but steadier. Hidden servant. It was as though the words were chiseling through the marble of his soul, reshaping his very identity. His tears no longer fell from fear, but from the dawning realization that everything he had given his life to was being reframed, not erased. Keanu leaned closer, his hand resting lightly on the worn leather journal, his voice carrying a tone that was both compassionate and unwavering. The Lord said this new chapter will not look like the ones before it. There will be no cameras, no headlines, no applause, but the miracles will multiply, not diminish. He said, my power is not for the stage, but for the secret room. Not for the masses who watch, but for the few who risk everything to believe. The crowd sat frozen in reverence. Many wept quietly, sensing the gravity of what was unfolding. The air was thick with the presence of something beyond human comprehension, as though heaven itself hovered above the arena, listening in. Benny's shoulders trembled. He thought of the believers he had heard about in China, men and women who risked prison to whisper the name of Jesus in hidden rooms. He thought of stories from the Middle East, where faith was practiced underground, where miracles happened without cameras to capture them. For the first time, he saw himself there, not in a stadium, but in a hidden cellar, laying hands on a child, whispering prayers that heaven would answer in silence. His lips moved, a broken confession slipping out. I never thought, I never imagined my ministry could end this way. But now, I see it is not an end at all. It is the beginning of what he always wanted. Keanu's expression softened into a quiet smile, his own eyes glistening. Yes, the Lord said your ministry was never about the lights. It was about the love. And now, He is calling you deeper into that love. What you thought was the height of your calling was only the beginning. This This hidden road is your true inheritance." Benny's chest rose with a sharp intake of breath. His tears fell freely, but now they glowed with gratitude. The flickers of revelation had turned into flame. His body trembled, but not only from sorrow, there was a dawning strength in his frame, the kind that came not from human effort, but from divine confirmation. The cameras caught every detail: his broken smile, his shaking hands, the tears that refused to stop. The crowd remained silent, caught between awe and fear, each heart knowing they had witnessed something eternal, a man's identity stripped bare and rebuilt before their very eyes. Benny whispered again, this time not in despair, but in surrender. "Hidden servant, if that is who I am, then let it be so." The floodgates finally gave way. Benny's body convulsed as sobs ripped through him, raw and uncontrollable. His frame shook violently, his head bowed, his hands clutching at his lap as if he were drowning in the very presence of God. The great preacher, who for decades had stood in confidence before millions, now crumbled openly, his collapse laid bare before the watching world. The arena fell silent. 40,000 people, hearts pounding, breaths held, sat frozen in reverence. Even the children among them stilled, sensing instinctively that something eternal was unfolding before their eyes. The camera zoomed in, capturing every detail, tears streaming down Benny's cheeks, his shoulders trembling, his suit soaked with the weight of his collapse. Keanu rose quietly from his chair. The motion was simple, almost unremarkable, but the symbolism carried like thunder. He stepped across the stage with slow, measured steps, his face set with calm strength. And then, before the eyes of the world, he did the unthinkable. He knelt. Kneeling beside Benny, Keanu bowed his head, his hand resting gently on the older man's shoulder. The image seared itself into the memory of every witness. The actor known for his strength, the man who had played heroes on screens across the globe, kneeling humbly beside a trembling preacher. Strength, bowing beside surrender. The sight was almost unbearable in its beauty. A ripple of gasps broke through the silence. Some in the crowd covered their mouths. Others clasped their hands to their chests. Tears flowed freely. Cameras caught the moment from every angle, broadcasting to millions watching online. History was being written not by spectacle, not by performance, but by surrender. Benny sobbed harder, his body collapsing sideways until his forehead nearly touched Keanu's knee. His words came broken, gasping between sobs. I cannot bear this alone." Keanu leaned close, his lips near Benny's ear. His voice was a whisper, but the microphones caught just enough to carry it across the arena. "The Lord said you will not bear it alone. He said, I am with you. I will walk with you into the shadows. I will never leave you. You are not being abandoned. You are being accompanied." The words fell like oil on raw wounds. Benny's convulsing sobs softened into heaving breaths, his body still trembling but steadied by the reassurance that pierced through despair. His hands, still shaking, clutched at Keanu's sleeve, as though holding to an anchor in a storm. The audience remained in absolute silence, watching as a moment unfolded that none of them had come expecting. They had arrived for a worship event, a night of encouragement, of music and miracles. Instead, they found themselves on holy ground, witnesses to the breaking and remaking of a man in real time. Joel Osteen sat motionless, his face pale, his lips pressed tightly together. The man known for his smile, his words of positivity, could only watch in stunned silence. He seemed smaller somehow, humbled by the weight of a divine moment he knew he could not control or shape with human words. The image on the stage spoke louder than any sermon. A man undone, a messenger kneeling, and the Spirit of God descending like a mantle that reshaped everything. The arena lights seemed to dim, though no technician had touched the controls. What filled the space was not stagecraft, but presence, an atmosphere, thick and heavy, pressing down until every heart felt it. People shifted uneasily in their seats, not from discomfort, but from the overwhelming sense that heaven itself had stooped down into Dallas that night. Benny's sobs slowed, his chest still heaving, his hands trembling. His white suit, once immaculate, was now streaked with tears. He looked like a man stripped bare, no longer the polished evangelist, but simply a child before his father. He raised his face just enough to meet Keanu's eyes, his voice faint, fragile, yet desperate. "How do I walk away from everything? My staff, my family, the millions who count on me. How do I leave them behind?" Keanu's eyes glistened. His voice, low and steady, carried the kind of strength that comes not from self, but from something higher. The Lord said, "Every person under your care will be provided for. Those meant to remain will remain. Those called to follow will follow. Not one life will fall through your surrender. He has already written their provision." Benny's lips quivered as the truth began to seep past his fears. He wanted to resist, wanted to argue, but the words carried a weight that cut deeper than logic. It was as though every sentence Keanu spoke carved away another layer of doubt, revealing the raw core of a man who had longed for something deeper without ever daring to name it. The crowd was still silent, 40,000 breaths suspended. Some wept quietly, others clasped hands in prayer. A woman near the front whispered, "This is holy ground," and her words rippled softly through rows like an echo of truth. Keanu's hand remained steady on Benny's shoulder, his voice dropping once more into a whisper. He said, "This collapse would not be your end, it is your beginning. When you rise from these tears, you will rise as a servant of the underground church, carrying a glory no camera could ever capture." The words cracked something deeper inside Benny. His sobs returned, but now mingled with a strange release, as though chains he had carried for decades were finally breaking. His cries no longer sounded like despair, they sounded like surrender. The camera stayed fixed, catching every angle, every tear, every tremble. Viewers across the world watched from living rooms, bedrooms, and church halls, sensing that what they were seeing was not a broadcast, but a visitation. Keanu lowered his head, whispering the final words God had given him for this moment. The Lord said, "Tell Benny that when he surrenders, he will discover joy deeper than applause. He will find me in the shadows, and he will never again feel incomplete." At those words, Benny collapsed forward fully, his forehead touching the stage floor, his arms stretched out, weeping, as though his soul itself had been torn open and healed at once. 40,000 people remained frozen in reverent awe, and in that silence the image seared itself forever into memory. Two men, one collapsing in surrender, the other kneeling in obedience. Both swallowed up in the gravity of a God who had interrupted history. Benny's body was still shaking when his lips finally formed the words he had been holding back. They slipped out like a confession, weak and trembling. "How do I do this?" It wasn't a rhetorical question. It wasn't a preacher's flourish. It was the voice of a man stripped of everything but the raw ache of obedience. 40,000 people heard it, and the weight of his words hung in the air like a fragile glass that might shatter if touched. Keanu kept his hand firm on Benny's shoulder, his voice steady, yet tender. "The Lord said you will not do it alone. Suzanne has been praying for this long before tonight. She has asked God for a deeper purpose, a reason beyond the stage and the lights. Her heart has already been aligned with this new calling." At the mention of Suzanne, Benny's eyes widened, his breath caught. He thought of her quiet evenings, the way her prayers had shifted in recent months, no longer pleading for larger crusades or greater reach, but softer, weightier requests for intimacy, for depth, for something unseen. She had prayed quietly, not pressing him, not demanding, but he had felt it. Now it all made sense. "She already knows," Keanu continued gently. "She has been asking God to prepare you. When you walk this road, she will walk it with you." Benny's trembling shifted, his sobs, once wild with fear, softened with the sting of truth. Realization that his wife, his partner through decades of ministry, had been interceding for this very thing, made his resistance crack even further. This wasn't just a divine call, this was confirmation through the one who knew his soul best. Keanu's voice grew firmer, carrying the authority of the message he bore. The Lord also said, "Your ministry will not collapse. Provision has already been made. Those who are meant to stay in the work will be cared for. Those called to continue will find new shepherds, and those chosen to walk with you into hidden places will know it clearly." Benny pressed both hands to his face, tears leaking through his fingers. Relief mingled with terror. He had carried the crushing fear that obedience would dismantle not only his life, but the lives of countless others who depended on the ministry. Now, hearing that God himself had spoken about provision, about protection, about continuation, it broke something inside him. The audience leaned forward, every soul locked in the gravity of the exchange. This wasn't a sermon. This wasn't theater. It was raw, unfiltered surrender happening before their eyes. And then Keanu delivered the detail that struck deeper than any before. His voice softened, almost breaking, yet steady enough for all to hear. When Michael calls you, it will not only confirm the vision, he will surrender his life to Christ. Your lifelong prayer for him will be answered on that day. The words hit Benny like a tidal wave. His entire body stiffened. He lowered his hands from his face, his tear-soaked eyes wide, his lips parted in stunned silence. For more than 20 years, he had prayed for his nephew Michael's salvation. He had pleaded with God in secret, whispered prayers in the dead of night. And now, to hear that the same sign that confirmed his calling would bring Michael into faith, it was too much for him to bear. Benny let out a sound that was not quite a sob, not quite a gasp. It was something deeper. The groan of a soul confronted with its deepest longing fulfilled. He rocked forward, clutching his knees, his tears no longer only from grief, but from a surge of unspeakable hope. The resistance in him began to fracture. Slowly, unmistakably, something shifted. The preacher who had clung desperately to his ministry, to the safety of his calling as he understood it, was loosening his grip. For the first time, surrender no longer looked like loss. It looked like promise. Benny's chest heaved, as if each breath carried a mountain. The tears streaming down his face had changed in texture. They were no longer just the tears of fear or grief. They carried something gentler, something breaking open inside him. His voice trembled, barely more than a whisper. "Michael, my Michael, Lord, if this is true, then I can no longer resist you." Generations had seen Benny Hinn command stages with authority, but none had seen him undone like this. Now, stripped of all pretense, his soul lay bare before tens of thousands in the arena and millions watching worldwide. Keanu's gaze softened. He did not speak with triumph, but with compassion, like a brother holding out a steadying hand. The Lord said, "This is the moment you've been prepared for. All the years of crusades, all the miracles, all the nights of preaching, they were not wasted. They were training for this. But the fulfillment will not be found in the applause of the multitudes. It will be found in the tears of the underground church, in the whispered prayers of believers who risk their lives to say his name." Benny closed his eyes. His body shook again, not in resistance this time, but in the breaking down of walls he had spent a lifetime building. He felt the shift inside him, the movement from clinging to letting go, from resistance to surrender. "How can joy be deeper than this?" he asked aloud, his voice strained. Keanu answered, without hesitation, "Because joy does not come from the crowd, it comes from obedience. The Lord said that when you step into this hidden calling, you will know joy that makes every stage seem empty. And when Michael calls, you will know that not only your calling, but your deepest prayer has been answered." That final assurance pierced Benny's defenses. His shoulders sagged, his arms hung limp at his sides. Slowly, he nodded through his tears. "Then let it be so. If this is the path, I will walk it." The shift was unmistakable. It was not resignation, it was surrender. Not the surrender of defeat, but the surrender of trust, the laying down of one life so that another could rise. The arena was silent still, though a holy hush filled every corner. Some in the crowd quietly wept, Others bowed their heads in prayer. What they were witnessing was no longer just about Benny Hinn or Keanu Reeves. It was about God breaking through human strength with divine purpose. Keanu bowed his head too, whispering one last line of the message. The Lord said that when you finally release it all, you will discover who you were always meant to be. Not a man of crowds, but a servant of the cross. Not a figure of fame, but a shepherd of the forgotten. Benny wept again, but this time his tears carried peace. The shift had happened. The surrender had begun. The days that followed the arena collapse moved like a dream, yet they were more real than anything Benny had experienced in years. He canceled flights. The massive crusade in Brazil was called off. The long-planned healing tour across Europe was postponed indefinitely. Guest appearances, television broadcasts, ministry tapings, all stripped from the calendar with a single word: canceled. His team was bewildered. Some asked quietly if he was sick. Others wondered if he had burned out after 50 years of ministry. His senior staff looked at him with eyes full of questions, but he had no words to offer them. He only said, "It's time to wait." And though they did not understand, most respected it. They had seen his collapse, they had felt the atmosphere in that arena, and something inside them told them this was not ordinary. The days stretched long. Benny spent them in silence more often than not, hours in his study surrounded by journals, old Bibles, and memories. He wrote page after page, capturing every word Keanu had spoken, every detail of the prophecy, every whisper he thought he could hear in prayer. Sometimes he wept over the pages. Other times he simply sat with the pen resting idle, staring at the empty space as if waiting for heaven itself to finish the sentence. Nights were no easier. Sleep eluded him. He lay awake replaying the moment again and again, the actor kneeling beside him, the impossible words that had cut through his defenses, the crowd holding its breath as God rewrote his calling in front of the world. At times he feared he had imagined it, that perhaps it had been too surreal, too dramatic. But then he would glance at Suzanne kneeling in prayer beside their bed, whispering the same petition she had whispered for a year, and he knew it was real. Day after day, he checked his phone. Toronto was where Michael lived, but there had been no call. His nephew had always been respectful, polite, but distant when it came to matters of faith. Benny prayed for him. Always had. He had cried out for his salvation more times than he could count. Yet the silence remained. 34 days passed like this, long hours of waiting, journaling, praying, remembering. A strange tension filled him. He wanted the sign to come, yet feared what it might mean when it did. The old life had been stripped away, but the new one had not yet begun. He was living in the in-between, the silence before a storm, the pause before destiny bends history. Then came day 35. He woke before dawn, his body restless, his heart pounding. He knew this was the day Keanu had spoken of, though part of him still wondered if anything would happen. He showered, dressed simply, and sat in his study with his Bible open. Hours passed. Noon came, then afternoon, evening. Still no call. His chest tightened as disappointment began to creep in. Perhaps he had misunderstood. Perhaps he had clung to something that would never come. Then, just as the sun began to sink beyond the horizon, his phone lit up on the desk. His heart froze. The name on the screen read, Michael Hinn. Benny stared at the screen, as if time itself had stopped. His hand hovered above the phone, trembling, not out of fear, but out of the weight of what it meant. This was the moment Keanu had spoken of, the moment 35 days had been leading toward. Finally, he pressed accept. "Michael," he whispered, his voice breaking. There was a pause. Then his nephew's shaky voice came through the line. "Uncle Benny, I don't know how to say this. Something happened last night. I had a dream, but it wasn't just a dream. It felt real." Benny gripped the edge of his desk, his heart hammering. He couldn't speak, couldn't interrupt. He could only listen. "In the dream," Michael continued, "I saw you. You were in some kind of tunnel, or maybe an underground room. There were people all around you, men, women, even children. They were dressed simply, speaking a language I didn't recognize. I think it was Chinese. You knelt in the middle of them and prayed. Tears blurred Benny's vision. Every word was exactly as Keanu had said. He pressed the phone tighter to his ear, unable to stop shaking. And then, Michael's voice wavered. There was this little girl. She was blind. I knew it somehow, just by looking. You placed your hands over her eyes and light came from your hands. Real light. And she opened her eyes. She could see. I've never seen anything like it. Benny gasped aloud, the sound echoing in the empty study. His entire body trembled. Michael's voice grew softer. But that's not all. Before she was healed, you spoke 3 words. I don't speak Chinese, but I remember them perfectly. Yesu aini. I looked it up this morning. It means, Jesus loves you. At those words, Benny dropped to his knees. The phone slipped from his hand to the floor. Michael's voice still coming through faintly. Tears poured down his face, his body collapsing just as it had in the arena. Yes, Lord, he whispered. Yes, Lord. Michael's voice grew clearer again, now steady with something new. Uncle Benny, I don't know what happened, but when I saw your face in that dream, I saw peace, real peace, joy I've never seen in you before. And I realized I've been wrong all along. I want what you have. I want Jesus. The words hit harder than any vision, any sign. Benny wept like a child, lifting his hands as if heaven itself were opening before him. His lifelong prayer had been answered. Michael, the skeptic, the distant nephew, was surrendering his life to Christ. Yes, Lord, Benny whispered again through sobs. Yes, Lord. I surrender too. Day 35 had come. The prophecy was fulfilled, and a new chapter had begun. The months that followed day 35 were quiet on the surface, yet thunderous beneath. For decades, Benny Hinn's name had been synonymous with large crusades, broadcasts, and miracles that reached millions. But slowly his name faded from the television screens and glossy ministry flyers. The headlines that once carried his face now fell silent. The world assumed perhaps he had retired or simply stepped away from public view. But in the hidden corners of the earth, whispers began to rise. In small gatherings, in basements, in candlelit rooms deep in restricted nations, there were stories. Stories of a man with graying hair, dressed in plain clothes, carrying no title and offering no spectacle. He would arrive quietly, sit among the persecuted believers, and pray. And when he prayed, blind eyes opened. When he lifted his hands, fevers broke. When he whispered, Jesus loves you, in languages he had never studied, hearts crumbled and faith blazed like fire. The miracles had not stopped. They had gone underground. One night in the mountains, Keanu Reeves sat in a small cabin far from the crowds. The fireplace crackled softly, its light flickering against the worn leather journal that lay open before him. He picked up his pen one last time, his handwriting steady as he wrote the closing line. Benny said yes. He closed the journal gently, his hand resting on it with a reverence that matched the weight of what it contained. The mission he had wrestled with for sleepless nights, the burden he had carried across an arena stage, was complete. His role had not been to build a ministry, but to deliver a message. And now that the message had taken root, his part was done. Far away, Benny appeared on one final broadcast. The studio lights were softer than usual, the set quieter. Stripped of theatrics, he stood alone, hands folded, his voice calm and resolute. His eyes, still red from the tears that had marked this season, held a depth that had not been there before. To everyone watching, he began, this will be my last public broadcast. For 50 years, I preached to millions. I declared the healing power of Jesus in arenas, in stadiums, across the world. I believed I was fulfilling my highest call, but in His mercy, God showed me that my journey was only preparation. He has called me into the shadows, into places where lights and cameras will never reach, and I must obey. The crew behind the cameras wiped tears from their eyes. His words carried no bitterness, no regret, only surrender. He looked directly into the lens, his voice gaining strength. God's plans are bigger than comfort. They lead us into places that scare us, places we would never choose on our own. But those are the places where the real work happens. Those are the places where His love shines brightest. Benny's voice softened as he continued, each word deliberate, every pause heavy with meaning. For years, I believed the measure of faithfulness was in the size of the crowd, in the volume of the applause, in the reach of our broadcasts. But the Lord has shown me something greater. Faithfulness is not measured in numbers. It is measured in obedience. The camera caught the faintest quiver of his lip, the evidence of tears threatening to return. He inhaled slowly, then pressed on. I thought I had already given him everything. But in truth, I held tightly to the very ministry He had entrusted me with. When He asked me to let it go, I resisted. But when I finally surrendered, I discovered that His calling was not smaller. It was greater. He leaned closer to the camera, his voice now trembling but steady in conviction. He has asked me to go where the world does not look, to stand with believers who risk their lives for the gospel, to pray in hidden rooms, to minister in places where the name of Jesus is whispered at the cost of blood. This is not the end of my ministry. It is its beginning. Behind the cameras, staff members wept silently. They knew this moment would mark the end of an era, but they also sensed they were witnessing the birth of something eternal. Benny's eyes shimmered with tears once more as he gave his final charge. I leave you with this. God's plans will stretch you beyond what you think you can endure. They will strip away the comfort you cling to. But in those moments of fear, you will find Him more real than you ever imagined. And when you dare to say yes, you will discover joy deeper than applause and peace stronger than recognition. You will discover Him. With that, he paused. The silence stretched for a beat, then two. Finally, he whispered, "Yes, Lord," as if sealing it once more for himself. And then he stepped away from the desk, away from the lights, away from the public stage forever. The camera lingered on the empty chair, its stillness more powerful than any sermon. Somewhere far from the studio, Keanu Reeves walked quietly along a mountain path near his cabin. The crisp air bit at his skin, but his heart carried warmth. He did not need to see Benny again, did not need to hear confirmation. He already knew. The mission was complete. He had delivered the message, and Benny had obeyed. That was enough. He returned to the cabin, pulled the journal from its resting place, and placed it gently into a drawer. No cameras, no applause, no recognition. Just obedience. Just the quiet satisfaction of knowing that God's will had been done. Back in the hidden places of the world, whispers grew louder. In villages tucked away behind closed borders, in warehouses where believers gathered by candlelight, in homes where faith was a death sentence, there was news. A man had come. He wore no white suit, carried no title, but he laid his hands on the sick, whispered prayers in unfamiliar tongues, and left behind miracles that could not be denied. They did not always know his name. Many simply called him the servant. But the persecuted church knew. They knew heaven had sent them a shepherd who had once stood on stages, but now knelt in silence. This was the hidden strength of obedience. And so, as this chapter closes, we leave you with the same invitation that changed Benny's life. If this story stirred your heart, share this incredible story with someone who needs hope. Would you have the courage to say yes like Benny did? Tell us in the comments below.